All right, so let's talk section 2 here at CFB Nation All-American Podcast. Notre Dame and the Big Ten. Bill Bender, you had an interesting take at sportingnews.com last week about Notre Dame and the Big Ten. The Big Ten should withdraw its essentially open invitation to join the conference and to stop playing Notre Dame as a non-conference opponent in football. We're talking, of course. Why do you feel that way?
Well, I mean, no, let's start before we even get to that. Let's start with a few things here. Like when I wrote that column, the Notre Dame fans and, you know, our good friend Brian Driscoll at Irish Breakdown, he likes to get on me about this stuff. But here's the deal. I'm a 12-year Catholic school kid, grew up in Ohio. I'm drinking, like, if you look, this is a Notre Dame glass that I got. It's look how old that is. And I drink water out of it. So I don't want to hear this, that I'm a Notre Dame hater by any means. I got that trip to South Bend and it's one of my best water cups. So I literally drink out of the cup of Notre Dame fandom, you know, whatever you want to say, but
the holy water right there.
But yeah, I get to see this from, you know, one of the things with my background, I like to pride myself, Notre Dame, high state in that area, know a lot about Michigan. And those are the three programs I probably write about most and understand most. So what I don't understand is why Notre Dame continues to cling on to independence. And that's kind of what, from their angle, this whole TV deal, I understand it from Notre Dame's angle. I wouldn't not do what they do. You give me my own network, my own 5-game arrangement with the ACC, my own scheduling, my own money, fine. But you can't tell me that they don't fit in the Big Ten. They play hockey there. You can't tell me that any of those ACC games are better than Michigan, Notre Dame. They're not. And I don't know why the Big Ten continues to give them that open invitation when they've been turned down time after time after time. And I know the history behind it. It's not like I don't know why Notre Dame has this weird relationship with the Big Ten. So, you know, like I said, I'm not being an Irish hater, but if from the Big Ten standpoint, I'd be like, all right, dude, you know, we've tried this many times. When we go to 20 and the SEC goes to 20, you're not going to be a part of it.
But don't you think shutting off Notre Dame as a non-conference opponent hurts the Big Ten?
I mean, no. Yes and no. I mean, from a rating standpoint, yeah. NBC is going to make them play nice, so to speak. If there's this Big Ten / Notre Dame Saturday, I get it. They already have that on the schedule. They have Purdue. They have they have Michigan. They have Michigan State. They have all those games. But what I don't understand from the Notre Dame angle sometimes is that there's this notion that they're above the Big Ten. I think that's how people feel in Penn State and Columbus and Michigan. That why did Michigan or Notre Dame and Michigan break that relationship off? Why is it that I've lived in Ohio most of my life and they've played this is only the second home and home that they've played in 43 years? That's absurd to me when you're dealing with what, in my estimation, could be one of the best rivalries in college football with Ohio State and Notre Dame, especially with Marcus Freeman there. So, and here's something I'd like to point out is I did some research, and so Notre Dame all time against the Big Ten, 209, 106, and 14. You look at that, you're like, yeah, if you're a Notre Dame fan, yeah, we're super better than the Big Ten, you know, go Irish. But if you look at since the BCS era, which is about the last 25 years of modern football, they're 33 and 27. That's not that great. And if you take away Purdue, who they're 14 and 4 against, that goes down to 19 and 23. And I know you're going to give me trivia in a little bit, but Bill, here's my trivia for you.
Oh boy.
Who are the only Big Ten schools that Notre Dame has a losing record against all time?
Ohio State.
Yeah.
I'm going to say Michigan.
And Michigan. There you go. So there you go. That's where all this angst is. It's why can't Notre Dame be in that same room with Michigan and Ohio State? Share the power. Create a ridiculous conference with USC and maybe Stanford if they add in. I think all of it adds up that I think some Notre Dame fans, not all, have to at least look at that plan from the Big Ten and say, yeah, I'd want a piece of that if it comes to that. Why wouldn't they?
Well, I mean, as has been said a million times, Notre Dame values its independence. If they can make the financials work, which it looks like they're going to be able to, and they have a clear path to the national championship in terms of playoff participation, they're going to choose independence every time. And it's not easy to go about it as an independent. So you got to give them credit for being able to figure out how to make it work. And I think people do get tired of it's the exception that Notre Dame has, it's 5 conference champions and Notre Dame and Notre Dame and Notre Dame. It always has to be in Notre Dame. But they've sort of earned their spot in the college football landscape by making a go of it. I mean, a lot, like 30 years ago, however many years ago, there was lots of independent teams. And then a bunch of them joined the Big East, and then the Big East collapsed. And then Miami went to the ACC, and it's like, Penn State used to be independent. Like there used to be a lot of independents. Now there's basically one standing, or BYU 2. There's 2 standing, and they've worked hard to make it work. And I think it's still going to keep working for them. And, they just enjoy the fact that they can have these fun 2-game home and home series like they did with Georgia a couple years ago. They've got Alabama on the schedule, I think 29 and 30 or something like that. They've got a few fun ones coming up. They've got, Michigan State and Michigan are in the next 10, 15 years. They got a Texas A&M. They've got Florida will be fun. They've got a one-off with Arkansas. I think the home and home part of that might have died in the pandemic. Right. They got a back half of a Wisconsin neutral site that's going to be fun. I mean, that's just been part of their allure, to have the flexibility to have these, 2-game, like I said, the home and home things in addition to their staples. And if they join the Big Ten, maybe those go away.
Well, but that's my point. Like, which ones have the most history tied to them? Like, I was arguing, one of my buddies is a huge Notre Dame fan, and he was trying to tell me that Notre Dame is prime time against everybody. Like, I've watched some bad Notre Dame Florida State primetime games, and let's be honest about it, the Notre Dame USC rivalry in recent seasons, not that great. I think the potential for it to be really awesome with Lincoln Riley and Marcus Freeman, yeah, that's there. But there was a couple years ago where I forgot USC and Notre Dame was on. Being honest, I mean, I forgot they were on. And I'm like, and that wasn't on Notre Dame's end. That was on the other end of it, to be fair. That was USC's fault. But, what rivalry has more history than Michigan Notre Dame or Michigan State Notre Dame? That has angst back to 1966. Purdue Notre Dame, that's very important. And I will contend that in this modern era, going into whatever the next chapter of college football is, that Ohio State Notre Dame has the potential to be the best game in college football if they play it on a regular basis. You can't tell me otherwise. Not with the Marcus Freeman tie, not with what Ohio State's been the dominant power in the Midwest in the 21st century. 20th century Notre Dame, that's fine. 21st century Ohio State. There's actually a time right now where they're going to be quote unquote right at the same time. Because when they played in the 90s, and that's going to get brought up a lot in the next 10 days, Notre Dame wasn't quite what Ohio State was when they played. And I'm not making excuses, but Ohio State was Eddie George and Orlando Pace and those guys, and Notre Dame was coming out of the back end of the Holtz era. This is the first time, maybe in a year or two, where they're both going to be recruiting at a ridiculous level. It could be the North's version of Georgia, Alabama, and I just don't understand why somebody would say no to that and cite independence. And I know I'm right, because I'm right.
This series reminds me of, I think I told you the Notre Dame Georgia series of a couple years ago, where it was two, and it reminds me of what it was in the Notre Dame Ohio State in the 90s, like 2 top 5, top 10. Notre Dame hadn't quite crested, or actually was coming down off the Holtz sort of, the peak of the Holtz years, and they were on the back end, like you said. Notre Dame, Georgia. Notre Dame was still kind of on the rise. Georgia was sort of already up there. Georgia won both those games. Ohio State won both the games in the 90s. But it's interesting to see Notre Dame recruiting at a level that Ohio State has been recruiting at now. And you're right, in the next 5 years, this has the potential to be a terrific game. Now, one thing, you mentioned Brian Driscoll, Irish Breakdown, by the way. Any Notre Dame fan who wants to get in the weeds with Notre Dame, you've got to subscribe to Irish Breakdown. Those guys are, walking encyclopedias for the last 30 years, 40 years of Notre Dame football. It's amazing stuff. He brought up something that I hadn't heard anywhere else that I thought was interesting was, and I think I told you, if the ACC contract breaks down and things sort of, Florida State and Miami and Clemson all find new homes and things like that, could you imagine a ACC style agreement between Notre Dame and the Big Ten, where Notre Dame plays 5 Big Ten teams a year, leaves 7 games on their own slate as an independent, rotates through 5 at a time, or however they do it with the ACC, and they're able to maintain independence but still have more Notre Dame Penn State games and more Notre Dame Michigan games and more Notre Dame Wisconsin games. What would you, and join the Big Ten for all the other sports that are, more, it would be more local as far as travel and things like that. What would the Big Ten say to that concept?
Probably that, yeah, we can't imagine that because we watched it in September from the time I was in 3rd grade till, Notre Dame stopped doing those things. So if I would, like I said, if I was Kevin Warren, I would take a hard line and say, we're not doing a half membership. I get why they do it with the ACC. I do. And it's beyond a football discussion. It has elevated the basketball program. And I'm a big college basketball guy. I love watching Notre Dame and Mike Bray. He's one of the best. And, they had a couple Elite 8 appearances right away. So it elevated them, and it's elevated their women's basketball program. You watch them when you play those games. So, but I wouldn't let them have a half arrangement. I said, we're either married or we're not. I mean, that's what I would do if Kevin Warren, and I get it but again, I think they're going to get that organically anyway, because if they're both playing with NBC, essentially, NBC is going to push that. We want Notre Dame versus Purdue. We want Notre Dame versus Michigan, and they'll still be great games because of the regionality of it. But at the end of the day, can you picture a Big Ten championship game in 2028 or 2029? And if you're a Notre Dame fan and you really want to piss off everybody else in the conference, Notre Dame versus USC for the Big Ten championship. The winner goes to play Alabama. I mean, that is the ultimate troll if you're the Irish, more so than not joining the conference, in my opinion.
Well, it's interesting. We just watched all summer long that, the last couple of years, everyone in college football is out for themselves. What's good. And everybody is, they're driven by self-interest. And the Big Ten is what's best for the Big Ten is keeping a good relationship with Notre Dame. What's best for Notre Dame, keeping a good relationship with the Big Ten. They don't necessarily have to get married for both of them to be happy. And that's why I think, I don't think that they would ever pull out completely and tell them we don't want to play you anymore or anything like that. And like you said, I think you told me there's some escalators in this contract to allow for Notre Dame to join. Yeah,
and the SBJ had those, and that just tells me that the flirtation will never end. I kind of chuckled when I read that New York Times article from 1999 when Jim Delaney said we will not invite Notre Dame again. That didn't happen. We heard the Notre Dame chancellor at the time of affairs at the time say we'd rather be one of 1 than one of 12. Well, that stayed the same, and Notre Dame has got by, and they have, to their credit, again, great athletic director, forward-thinking guy in Jack Swarbrick, able to do these things and get them included in the playoff and making sure that they are still, one of the things I will say is it drives me crazy when people say Notre Dame's irrelevant, because they're not. They've had 5 straight 10-win seasons. Brian Kelly has pushed them into the bridge. I call them the bridge, and we talked about this last week, where Alabama, Ohio State, and Georgia are the cream. Clemson's next, and then it's Notre Dame. And that's Marcus Freeman's job, is to recruit at a level that we don't hear the same press conference when they play at Georgia or in Alabama, or honestly, when they play Ohio State here in a few weeks. What are you going to hear? We didn't have enough on the perimeter. We didn't have enough speed on the perimeter, those kind of things. And I think Marcus Freeman's going to change that just in time for their Big Ten opener when they join the Big Ten. So that and I think it's a fair argument both ways.